So my name is Howard Crawford. I'm the scientific director of the Henry Ford Pancreatic Cancer Center here in Detroit. My role here is to recruit the best scientists that I can find to bring them together to address various aspects of pancreatic cancer so that we can eradicate this disease from all of our lives. My particular role scientifically is that I look at the plasticity of pancreatic cancer cells. And what I mean by that is the ability of pancreatic cancer cells to change their identity based on what sort of challenges they find themselves up against. So for instance, chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is something that would be considered an environmental challenge to a tumor cell. Ideally, chemotherapy will kill the tumor cell. But if the tumor cell changes its identity in such a way that it is resistant to chemotherapy, then the chemotherapy itself is ineffective. The issues with plasticity is it doesn't just go one direction. It goes both ways. So we can essentially play a game of whack-a-mole with pancreatic cancer. We hit them with one type of chemotherapy, it changes its identity. We hit with a different type of chemotherapy that would be susceptible to, it changes its identity back. So the idea that this is a constantly moving target is what the challenges we faced in treating this cancer. So with regards to that, together with my entire team, we work together. And we work together to conquer this disease. I am just a small cog in that equation. So collectively, we look at the disease as a whole, but individually, we're looking at different parts of the disease. So I think if you visit one of these other videos that you can see here, you'll have met Nina Steele, who's associated with looking at pancreatic cancer in a big data way. So she looks at how the tumor cells and the non-tumor cells communicate with each other and tries to unravel all of these different gene expression pathways that would then be able to be addressed with some sort of therapy. I have other faculty that are addressing specifically the scarring tissue that forms around pancreatic cancer. Some people would call it the desmoplasia or the fibrosis that is protecting pancreatic cancer cells from chemotherapy. So the idea that if we can diminish that stroma, if we can diminish that scar tissue, then in fact the tumor cells would be exposed to a greater amount of chemotherapy at any given time. I have other faculty that are trying to create what we would call avatars of a person's pancreatic cancer, and that is to make what's called an organoid. So we take primary tumors from the patient, whether it be at diagnosis or at surgery, and then bring those into the lab and put them into a tissue culture dish and grow them as if they were the tumor cells they represented the cancer from that particular patient. And the idea there is if that tumor, which is the way we grow them, it maintains its identity in this case, we can test drugs that would then kill those tumor cells specifically, and quickly enough we can get that back to the patient. So literally acting as an avatar in our laboratory for what's happening in that patient's body. So many people that work with me and work for me have a very personal relationship with this cancer specifically. And they seek me out to work with me because they want to address what happened to a loved one, what happened to a friend. Personally, I don't have a connection to pancreatic cancer, but I have a lot of cancer in my family. My brother died of lung cancer. My mother had colon cancer when I was growing up. My dad died of multiple myeloma. So I was going to be a cancer researcher no matter what. That just was a given. But then when I was working in breast cancer and colon cancer and skin cancer, I encountered pancreatic cancer. And you actually gave the answer to the question. The answer to the question of why pancreatic cancer, it's because it's hard. There were so few people working in pancreatic cancer. There was so little funding going towards addressing the difficulties of treating pancreatic cancer that it needed to be addressed. And so I was at the right position in my life that said, look, I am young at the time, and I have the energy, and I have the willpower, and I have the intellect to be able to really conquer this cancer. And together, again, I've learned a lot over the years that I can't do it by myself. None of us can. And I think this is the really spectacular thing about pancreatic cancer compared to a lot of other cancer fields, is that we really do all work together. We really do collaborate. We really do cross-pollinate, not just within the center, but all across the country and all across the world. It's such a difficult cancer. It's such a devastating disease that nobody puts their ego into this. It's whoever finds the cure, we're going to have one really big party for that person. So the issue with every cancer that I can think of is we don't know enough about the biology of it. So we talk about basic science and translational science, and I really don't like even those buckets that they could put into. So the idea that we need to learn more about the biology of a cancer at the most basic level so that we understand the building blocks that make them sensitive to certain drugs or resistant to certain drugs. We need to know what the basis of that is. So we could call that basic research, but we don't need to know about it as much in a mouse, although we find them very useful for modeling the disease. We need to know about it in a patient. So we need to get the samples from a patient. We need to apply some of the techniques that you may have heard about in one of the other interviews. The idea that we can take a deep dive into the specific biology of all these patients' tumors at the most basic molecular level, and then understand how this cancer works, how it's put together, and find those vulnerabilities that will eradicate it. Well, in some ways, the Sky Foundation brought me here. Because I was in the Mayo Clinic in Florida, and I started working with a faculty member at Wayne State here in Detroit. He was asking whether or not I would collaborate with them, and I said, absolutely, I've known the guy for a long time. And he said, I've got this funding from this woman who's running this organization, Sheila Castleman, who's running the Sky Foundation, and I got this funding, and I need your help. And so I started working with him. I came up to give a talk. I'm still living in Florida. And I met Sheila, and I met all of the advisory board. And I knew the environment was really very positive towards conquering this disease. So I joined the University of Michigan, still working with Sheila as much as possible. And the idea that Sheila had that I fought against a little bit, let's be honest, she wanted at first to fund pancreatic cancer research in the Detroit area or the Detroit and Ann Arbor, the Michigan area. And then she wanted to grow it out nationally. I'm thinking, well, there's so many people that are going to be competing for all this, well, I should say not this much money compared to what other organizations could provide. And I was a little skeptical, but I have to say it's made a huge impact to the entire field, because what we've managed to do was fund people that wouldn't necessarily have had the opportunity to be funded. I think you're going to meet another person as a postdoctoral fellow in my laboratory who really wouldn't be able to compete for most funding mechanisms, but she was able to compete for a Sky Foundation grant. And it's made all the difference in her career. So the idea here is that the Sky Foundation literally plants seeds all across the country and grows researchers in such a way that they can gain both the data and the confidence to open their own labs and be very productive researchers. And I have to say that I've never met anyone that got a Sky Foundation grant that isn't grateful for 10, 20 years later. And I think that this is going to be, Sheila's legacy in large part is everything she's done for the field. So pancreatic cancer is 20% more likely to form in African American patients. And we at the Henry Ford Pancreatic Cancer Center are in a unique position to address this. That is to say, the patient population that comes to Henry Ford is about 25% African American. And the idea that this is an incidence issue and not especially, there's a survival issue potentially, but not especially all survival, it's incidence, is that we have access to the patient samples from those patients where we can really start to dive deep, either with the big data aspect or the organoids I talked about earlier, that we can have avatars for those patients and understand what's the difference between the African American cancer and the non-African American cancer. And by doing that, I think we learn more. Remember what I said about the basic biology of the tumor. We learned something about the basic biology of the tumor that might not be exactly the same in every patient, but something is going to be similar in every cancer. So we just need to, if we can find the specific aspects of an African American tumor that make it distinct, I'm sure that we're going to find something unique that we haven't appreciated in everyone's cancer.